Yo, welcome to Caffeinated Deep Dives, a show where I drink a lot of caffeine. This week is Red Bull, not coffee. Read at least one book on a topic, do hours of research, and then hit record for an hour, give you a deep dive. And this week's deep dive is on Sriracha sauce and the history of chilies/peppers. I know you'll enjoy. Early in Sriracha's life, one of David Tran's packaging suppliers told him, "Your product is too spicy. How can you sell it?" Add a tomato base, some friends counseled. Sweeten the flavor to pair it better with chicken, others said. But Tran stood firm. Hot sauce must be hot. If you don't like it hot, use less. We don't make mayonnaise here. So that's David Tran in 2013, the founder of Sriracha hot sauce, legendary Sriracha hot sauce. That was an interview with the LA Times. Great one-liner. If you don't like it hot, use less. We're not making mayonnaise here. So today's episode, at this point, you'll understand it is about Sriracha hot sauce, but not just about Sriracha hot sauce. I could talk about Sriracha hot sauce for probably 5 or 6 hours. I suspect many of you would want me to do that. But in respect of all the other listeners that are looking for that little tighter, that 1 hour to 1 hour and 30-minute breakdown of a topic, that's what we're going to do. So we're going to talk about the immigrant hustle of David Tran, Chinese-Vietnamese refugee. He was actually born a year after my dad. So like his story hits very close to home for me. And it's a little bit of a detour from our past 2 episodes. We did Calvin and Hobbes, Bill Watterson. Last episode, we did La Sagrada Familia and Anthony Gaudi. And the main theme of those episodes was like an idea kind of takes over your life and you become a vessel to bring the idea into the world. You could kind of say the same with David Tran's story, as we will discuss. But I'm going to talk about the entire history of peppers and the science behind them, chili peppers, because it is fascinating. And later in the episode at the end, I know you guys love the awards section. We're going to have some great awards for this episode. But let me continue a bit with David Tran's 2013 LA Times interview here. Tran had one guiding principle: make a rich man's sauce at a poor man's price. In more than 2 decades of operation, Tran has kept the wholesale price of his sauce constant. He would not disclose what it is. My American dream was never to become a billionaire, Tran said. We started this business because we like fresh, spicy chili sauce. So funny enough is Forbes had an article earlier in 2023, I think February, and they did crown David Tran the first hot sauce billionaire in America. It's because he owns 100% of this business. The other famous hot sauces like Tabasco or Frank's Red Hot Sauce, we'll discuss later. They're not 100% owned by a Chinese-Vietnamese refugee, which is incredible, right? So just a little overview of where we are with Sriracha. So it's the 3rd most popular hot sauce in America. I mentioned the other 2 just now, Tabasco and Frank's Red Hot Sauce. It owns about 10% of the hot sauce market, and it does about 150 mil a year. The $1 billion claim, or the billionaire claim on David Tran, is if they're doing about 150, so let's just call it 180 or 200. That's 5 times revenue to get him to $1 billion, which isn't that absurd because if you guys know the Cholula hot sauce, the Mexican one with the wooden circle top, that's sold in 2020 to a private equity firm for 8 times a revenue. So Sriracha comfortably in the billionaire range. Also, the Sriracha brand, I mean, you're talking about intangible. Forget the revenue here. Like as I will show you, like Sriracha. Like David Tran couldn't even patent the name Sriracha. I mean, Sriracha, the bottling got a trademark, but like Sriracha is like from a region of Thailand, right? So this is not, when you see other Sriracha products, they're not paying Sriracha, David Tran Sriracha, the Hui Fong, which is the name of his business. They're not paying him like licensing fees because David couldn't even get a legal protection on the name because it's from a region of the world. There are a couple cases that are interesting around how that works. We don't really have fully discussed it right now, But just know that I didn't have any hot sauce this morning. I probably should have. I had a ton of Red Bull, which is standard. But yeah, this is my favorite. I love Hui Fang's hot sauce. I put it on freaking everything. And I also like Tabasco. I'm not gonna lie. Tabasco is pretty good. And I don't get super adventurous with the different hot sauces, like the ones you see on Hot Ones, that YouTube show, Sean Evans. I don't get that adventurous. I stick to what I know. This to me is like the Heinz ketchup of hot sauce. Like, I like Heinz, right? I like Hui Fang Sriracha. I'm not playing around. Anyways, let's get into the story, the backstory of chili peppers. So the source material for this episode, there's a few, but I'll call a couple of them out right here. The Devil's Dinner by Stuart Walton is a book about the chili pepper specifically. There's a little bit of mention of Hui Fang Sriracha, but nothing huge. The Gastropod podcast, which is where I got the book recommendation. Fantastic, great background on the pepper and just food in general. And there's a great oral history from UC Davis with David Tran that I use as a good source material for this podcast. The aforementioned Forbes article. And there's another book called 8 Flavors. I'll talk about the author with that at the end in the awards section. But let's dive into the origin of peppers. So the first thing I want to flag about the pepper game, the chili pepper. So chili is a proper name. It's actually not related to peppers at all. That is a snafu by Christopher Columbus. Now, listen, I know in this day and age, it's impossible to talk about Christopher Columbus without talking about the horrors that he brought to the Americas when he discovered the New World. So I just want to say, like, context fully understood, right? The conflict, the disease that was brought to the Americas and the local indigenous populations, all understood. And I probably will in a future episode talk about those issues specifically. But when I talk about the Columbian Exchange, which is the trade that happened because Christopher Columbus discovered the New World, I am going to stick more to the trade side. There's a bit on the slave aspect that will be mentioned, but that's closer to the sugar. But it had that commodity had a big catalyst for spreading actually chilies throughout Africa. So that will be mentioned. Future episode, we'll dive deeper into all the 360, the development stuff and the negative stuff with the opening of the New World. But today it will be more in the trade area, the trade section. So from The Devil's Dinner, that book that I mentioned, chilies go back about 7,000 to 7,000 BC, so about 9,000 years at this point. They're first domesticated around 5,000 BC, so 7,000 years ago at this point. The interesting thing about chilies is it might be one of the most widespread commodities, food commodities, in the sense of how prominent it is in all these parts of the world. It's used widely in Africa. It's used widely in Southern Europe, used widely in the Americas. The way it got to the United States and Canada is actually very roundabout related to this trade that I mentioned. It's used widely in Southeast Asia. China, perhaps the largest beneficiary of the chili trade, Hunan, Szechuan food, they actually will not be covered. I will not be covering China's exposure to the chili pepper. That will need its own episode because with Sriracha, Southeast Asia is kind of where the story with Sriracha ends in the spread of the chilies. So when you hear chili pepper, again, that was because Christopher Columbus was traveling to try to find India to look for peppers and expand the spice and pepper trade. They obviously found the Americas, and the idea of using the word pepper to relate to anything that was hot or spicy is why now we call it chili pepper. So they're actually not in the same family. Peppers and chilies are in completely different families. I'm going to butcher this word here, but chili are from the Solanaceae family. This includes the nightshades, potatoes, tomatoes, and eggplants. So There's this great line written in the book Devil's Dinner. It says, the fact that chilies were domesticated in 5 separate zones, resulting in 5 principal species of capsicum, is evidence that long before the science was understood, human beings had learned systematically to disregard the adverse signals that the chili plant was sending out. So let's talk about those adverse signals and the heat that we all know from chili, from sriracha. Sriracha is not even close to the hottest a hot sauce out there. So, when you eat a chili, a sauce or a hot sauce, or you bite into like a jalapeno or a cayenne, what's happening, right? What is it that we're talking about the adverse signals? Well, mammals have a sensory receptor for pain, right? The receptor is called the transient receptor potential channel. So effectively, it's on your skin, it's on your tongue, even in your eye. Like, I'm not going to do it, but if you throw some sriracha in your eye, that's going to hurt like an MF, right? But effectively, there's a component, an active compound in chilies. It's called capsaicin. It binds to the receptors that I just mentioned that are in mammals. And what it does is it makes that burning sensation. It makes you feel like it's 42 degrees Celsius, 108 degrees Fahrenheit. So you'll get similar sensations, similar pathways if you put your hand on a burner, which I do a lot cooking breakfast for my son. Like, I'm making these waffles and just totally forget that the burner's on. But I digress. That's just the feeling you get. So why is there this burn? Why does the pepper or chili create capsicum? Right? Why is there this active compound? It's because if you look in a chili, think about a cut jalapeno, right? There's a misconception that the seeds is where the heat comes from, but that's incorrect. There's a white membrane that you might remember. It's even in red peppers or like bell peppers, which have zero heat, by the way. So like the meter that people use, the Scoville heat unit, to see how hot something is, just know that like red and green bell peppers have 0. But you'll know that white membrane, that's where the heat is for like a jalapeno or chili, is because it's protecting the seeds. Basically, it's a defense mechanism from savage mammals, right? Like, the problem with mammals and peppers evolutionarily is that mammals can chew on the seeds and destroy them. So the way that peppers actually are chilies, at this point, I've mixed up chilies and peppers so much, thanks Christopher Columbus, that just know that I'm talking about the same thing, right? I'm not talking about like black pepper. I'm talking about chili peppers at this point. Just know that. Birds don't have the same pain receptors, but also they don't eat seeds whole. They'll eat them and they'll just deuce them out like completely whole, not compromised or chomped on. That's the way that birds eat peppers, and the seeds can survive. That's how it propagates. The seeds in the shit of the birds throughout the Americas, because that's where, I forgot to even say, where is this all from? The original location for chilies was in southern Mexico, in what is present-day provinces of Puebla, Oaxaca, and Veracruz, right? That's where it all started. But it went to the Americas because of the birds. And when I said the Columbian Exchange earlier, a lot of the stuff that went back to Europe, we're talking about potatoes, sweet potatoes, tomatoes, chilies, right? That went back to Europe. The stuff that came towards Latin America, the Americas, were domesticated animals like cattle, sheep, and goat. Well, what animal did, just fun fact aside, what animal did the Americans have? They had turkey. So like, I think they call them wild running chickens, or land chickens, I believe is what they called them. All right. So now I've established why these chilies have heat. So next part we'll talk about is how much heat does a chili have? So America's hot and humid. Hot and humid areas have lots of insects. Insects will go after the chilies. So the more capsicum there is because the more defense they're trying to have against, bugs, insects, and obviously humans getting at the seeds and destroying the seeds. So that's how we know how much. I mean, that's where areas of the world where you grow them, those conditions through breeding lead to hotter and hotter chilies. Now, let's do a quick detour on the Scoville heat unit. We're going to do a deep dive on it in the awards section. But basically, the way it's done is I'll give you an idea. Is like I mentioned the bell peppers are 0. Tabasco is about 2,500. Sriracha is about 5,000. A jalapeno is 30,000. Scoville heat unit, so 30,000 shu. Cayenne is 50,000 shu. Getting pepper sprayed in the face is 2 million shu. So can be used as a weapon. The hottest pepper in the world is called Pepper X. It just displaced the Carolina Reaper. These are bred, right? There's like professional breeders. The gentleman's name is Ed Curry from South Carolina. They breed to make the hottest peppers, chili peppers in the world. You were probably aware of these chili pepper competitions, and that's 2.6 million shoes. So what is a shoe? So a Scoville heat unit is you take some capsicum or a pepper and you dilute it. So the whole purpose is how many times do I have to dilute something with like a droplet of sugar water for that heat to no longer be there? That is what the process is. That's what shu represents. So a Tabasco drop, like if I poured this out right now on my laptop, I'm not going to do that. But if I did, and I wanted to dilute that where you couldn't taste any heat or have any heat effect, I'd have to put 5,000 drops in that. If I were to take a Pepper X, now the hottest chili in the world, I'd have to do 2.7 million of those. So that's how you do a quick measurement. Now, when you have the spicy goodness in your mouth, but it gets a little bit aggressive, water does not work. You probably know this at this point. Water does not work for making it less heaty. It's because it's not water soluble. Capsicum is not water soluble. People use cold milk, Europe, and ice cream because capsicum is soluble in fat. All right. So just FYI, water does not work. Now, everything I just laid out, why do humans like it? So these chilies have defense mechanisms. They hit your pain receptors. Why do humans like it? So there's a couple reasons. We're going to list them now. This section is gold. I really enjoy this section. So it's been domesticated since 5,000 BC. Clearly, there's something about the chili that humans like. All right. So number one, it's easy to transport and plant, right? Chili's not very big. The seeds can grow in very many conditions, including high altitudes. So Peru, very, very prominent in Peru. Now, they can, the other things that chili seeds do, or chili peppers, is that what is the effect that humans get from them? You sweat. You trigger, basically, the defense mechanism of your body. You know, you're sweating, the pain's coming, and what does the body do when there's this feeling of pain? These channels are being hit. It hits you with endorphins, right? So chili peppers, they just feel good afterwards. It's not for everyone, but like, you know, there's been studies done about how people that really like hot chilies, the risk takers. It's that roller coaster feeling. You do something dangerous or you do something difficult, but your body is it's flooding you with endorphins to deal with this perception of pain. So it actually feels good. I mean, that's just from, so why do humans like it? I just said it's like easy to plant, feels hella good. And that's just from the human side. The other part is like you're cultivating this crop. Capsicum is known to be lethal to around 75% of all foodborne pathogens. It's great for preserving foods. That lining, that capsicum lining I mentioned earlier in the peppers, it's also antimicrobial. So that's protecting the chili itself. So at this point, we said easy to plant. You get this hit of endorphins, and it's got these preservation antimicrobial properties. Now, something else. In the year, recording this 2023, we have an abundance of flavors, an embarrassment of flavors, right? Too many flavors. But think about diets 5, 6, 7,000 years ago, right? I mean, frankly, even 100 years ago, diets were pretty bland. But in the Americas, they're subsisting, the local populations, on squash, potatoes, sweet potatoes. It's very starchy, not a ton of flavor. Chilies bring a lot of flavor, right? This is like, and it's not like salt. Obviously salt and pepper, like black pepper, is a huge trade in the early thousands. This is what the Silk Road is all about. But there wasn't a lot of salt in the Americas way thousands of years ago. So chilies brought a different flavor profile. And now there's actually these health benefits. Like, I'm not a doctor. Like, I love to tell my wife that I'm not a doctor. But then when I want to be an asshole about it, I go, I'm not a doctor, but I am a doctor's son and brother. Like, my brother and dad are doctors. I don't know how much credibility that gives me, but I'm just going to say I'm not a doctor. This is not health advice. Allegedly, hot spice can clear your sinuses. I've experienced that eating pho with sriracha, okay? Now, this does sound like medically accurate or just from analyses that has been done, but chilies have a lot of iron, potassium, magnesium, vitamin A, vitamin B, lots of vitamin C. Chilies also proven to release amylase, an enzyme that helps to break down starchy foods. And allegedly, capsicum binds to receptors in the stomach to produce the feeling of fullness. So I actually think those last three, they are proven. I just had to give the disclaimer, not health advice, even though my brother and father are doctors, and I'm trying to claim that reputation from them. So just take that whole segment knowing everything I said there, check on your own. Some people have adverse effects to capsicum and chili peppers, but those are all positive benefits, right? Adds flavor, makes you feel full, helps with digestive enzymes. And the last thing I'll say about why were humans attracted to chili peppers. Red's a great color. It's a very, very lively color. And it's also been used in warfare. So the red's for decorations, but also the pungent smoke, the capsicum, for all those reasons we said, hits those pathways. They've been used. I mean, nowadays, pepper spray, that's a thing. So back in the day, they used to light these peppers on fire as a defensive mechanism. So a lot of reasons for humans to clamp onto chili peppers. And now we get to the good stuff. How did chili peppers go around the world? It's actually crazy. So I'm about to give you an idea of how it went from the Americas to the Iberian Peninsula, because it never really got into Northern Europe, actually. And we're going to troll the Northern Europeans for this. But then from Iberian Peninsula, it went to the Africa, Middle East, and then to Southeast Asia. Again, East Asia, China, Japan, and South Korea, they got long tradition of chilies and hot sauces, but we're going to skip those for today's episode. So phase one of the Columbian Exchange is, this is from the book. The Spaniards used chili in much the same way as they used black pepper. So when these chilies came back, the Spaniards would flavor pork dishes with them, and then they would create some spicy sausages that we know as chorizo, right? Chorizo is delicious. But the real place, the most important place in the Columbian Exchange, the trade of agricultural commodities, was Portugal. You all know where I'm going with this, especially my British friends. That peri-peri, that Portuguese chicken, right? So the Portuguese got their hands on these chilies, started making sauce with it, delicious sauce. And where were Portuguese future colonies? Where did Portuguese trade a lot with? Was in Africa. And I mentioned earlier the slave trade. This is where it gets gnarly, but also contributed to the expansion and distribution of chili and hot sauces through the continent of Africa. So as part of the slave trade, a big thing that happened was, you have to remember, in Africa itself, the different tribes and communities within Africa also ran incontinent slave trades, and they would meet with Europeans. And what the Europeans did, though, was that they would take people from different tribes, and the purpose was extremely negative, right? It's like, you want to get as many different people from different tribes as possible to put them onto a boat, because if they're from different tribes, they can't communicate with the same language, and they can't like plot a coup or overthrow the boat. So essentially what's happening is that a lot of Africans from different tribes, different parts of Africa are going to the New World. And when they come back, the ones that do come back, because obviously there's a huge death rate on these slave ships, but the ones that do come back, they're spreading the peppers and chilies that they're finding and that they're cultivating to different tribes in Africa. So this is how chili spread through Africa quite quickly. And then Africa and the Middle East the Arabians have had a long history of trading with the Europeans in Africa. That's how the Arabians got hold of chili peppers in the Middle East. Middle East has a great tradition of using chili peppers. Not only chili peppers, combining it with the India spices of like ginger, black peppers, cloves. So that part is how Africa and Middle East get the chilies. So now we're going to talk about India. How does India get chilies? India gets chilies from Portugal, specifically in the state of Goa, which is the big trading outpost. So the Portuguese went there, traded with the local Indians, and this is the influence of vindaloo and the Portuguese bread created, I guess, what we would now know as naan. So that's influence. So vindaloo, know that the vindaloo is coming from these Portuguese chili traders. And then what's interesting about India and their relationship with chilies is they already have this spice history, right? All the spices that I mentioned, garlic, black pepper, cloves, nutmeg, things from this region. India loves making sauce. Now they're adding chili to the mix. And then Portuguese, again, are the people that take it to Southeast Asia. Specifically, I'll read some excerpts here. In 1511, the year after they commandeered Goa, the Portuguese sent a diplomatic emissary to the Southeast Asian kingdom of Atuhaya, modern-day Thailand. Within a few short years, a full-scale two-way trade had been established between the territories, and chilies, which the Portuguese might well have offered to the Thai in that earliest visit, had put down roots as swiftly as they did in India. Once again, chilies became the food of the poorest people and supplemented a whole diverse array of regional dishes that sprang up throughout the kingdom. Two things I want to say about chilies in Thailand. So as noted there, and it's something I should have mentioned earlier, chilies, adding flavor, were used a lot by the poorer parts of the populations wherever they went. This is actually very different than sugar. Sugar was very much for the rich. The sugar trade in Europe was for the kings and the nobility. And it's because think about how intensive sugar was, right? So we're talking about the sugar trade. That's where a lot of slavery, specifically Brazil and Africa, that slave trade was for sugar. And in the Caribbean, sugar is extremely human labor intensive. So it's not as easily plantable, as I mentioned earlier, about chilies. So chili was actually much more available to poorer parts of populations because they were easier to plant and because they could grow in so many different parts of the world, as we've talked about. 5 different zones of the world have taken to chilies and created local versions of it, right? So poor people through the centuries have been able to use chilies for all the human benefits we talked about, right? The health benefits, the endorphins, the adding the flavor, the decorative purposes. All of that was available because it was not as intensive to do as these other kind of cash crops, the spices even from India. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'll say about Thailand and sauce, and this will take us to Sriracha, because as we said from the top, Sriracha, the original ingredients and recipes for this is from Thailand. India used chili to make very heavy sauces to cook proteins in. What's that difference with Thailand and Vietnam, where my family's from? They use sauces for dipping. So in Thailand, there's a long history of creating and using fish sauce for dipping. Cutting in red chilies is such a classic dipping sauce. Same thing with the future creation of what would become sriracha. They would have, in Thailand, chili-based sauces, but much runnier than how we know sriracha today. So there you go. That is the route that we take for the origin of hot sauce in Thailand. So now I want to talk about Europe quickly because, excuse me, Europe is what influenced, particularly obviously Great Britain, is what influenced the United States. Northern Europe never had a hot sauce tradition or a pepper tradition like the Mediterranean does. But if you think about French cooking, British, the non-Indian British cooking, the Nordic states, chilies never made it to Northern Europe or in a big way. There's a reason why. The reason is quite weird. Oh, it's not weird. It's historical. So there was a way of thinking for thousands of years, up to the Middle Ages, the explanatory power of the humoral system. So let me read through what that meant. It was a theory of medicine in like medieval Europe. So I'm reading here from The Devil's Dinner. I'm describing the humoral system. This is a theory of the body and medicine. So your blood was associated with air. Like we're talking parts of the body with the 5 elements, and responsible for a sanguine demeanor. Yellow bile from the body is associated with fire. This led to hot-tempered natures. Black bile was related to earth. This brought melancholy. Phlegm was like water, which produced an apathetic disposition. So this was a theory in the Middle Ages of Europe about how parts of your body worked. So I just described there phlegm, blood, bile, and what this largely meant was the food you ate would influence like how much of these things would change in you, right? So when the Indian trade was happening with India, you get cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves. These spices were considered hot and dry and would be generative of yellow bile in your body, which is the bringer of caloric or hot-tempered behavior. So obviously this is extremely wrong, but this explanatory framework, and mind you, we all got dumb explanatory frameworks, right? I got some really, really dumb explanatory frameworks in my own life. I'm too embarrassed to say what they are, but I'm not going to troll the middle-aged Europeans for this. But this did influence, though, why chilies didn't spread in Northern Europe. Because even as we get to the Enlightenment around the 1500s, this old system of how food influenced and would change different parts of your body, this humoral system, is still held sway in Europe. So when a new food came, they didn't want to, it wasn't readily accepted in Europe. I mean, outside of the Iberian Peninsula, which we mentioned, that fresh peri-peri in Portugal, the peri-peri hot sauce, Spain with its chorizo used a lot of chilies. The Italians started using chilies quite a bit, actually. Red bell peppers are grown in the Mediterranean. But these other cuisines, I mean, other local cuisines, France, Nordic states, Germany, England, did not embrace chilies. And they didn't, because they didn't know how to put the chili and the influence within that humoral system. So potatoes is one of the few ones that truly spread through Northern Europe from the Americas. But so that influence of not understanding how new foods work basically went to North America, which is ironic because North America is obviously right next to South America, where all the chilies came from. But the trade, the way it worked, it went around the world and came back to North America. So North America actually took a lot of the sauces that came from Europe. Fish sauce was huge in Europe. It was actually originally made in Rome in, I guess, 100, 200 BC, totally forgotten, and then brought back from the trade with China and Southeast Asia. But anyways, like the sauce situation in North America, you had the main hitters, which is Tabasco, which was created in 1850s. And then Frank's Red Hot Sauce came in the 1930s. But like that was the tradition of chilies because of the northern European influence in early Americas, late 1700s 1800s, there wasn't a huge chili tradition, even though Mexico was right there. There's the creation of Tex-Mex, and over a century till you get to like 1950s is when you really had, I guess, cowboys too in the 1800s ate a lot of chili, but the chili hot sauce tradition in the Americas, you can see how it took more of the Northern European influence outside of Texas, outside of the South, than it did from fully embracing it and making it a cash crop. But that's why our boy David Tran, who we will be talking about now, was able to create one of the great North American United States sauces. All right, people, it's time to get into that David Tran Sriracha story. So with all the preamble I gave you, you're probably really hungry right now, but just hold tight. Give me another 30, 45 to indulge you with David Tran's incredible story. This ain't mayonnaise, son. So the main thing I want to frame about this story, immigrant hustle, right? No complaining, getting the job done. This is David Tran. Okay. Number two, zero advertising. They've never spent $1 on advertising this hot sauce, and I'll explain why. But the whole point is this is just a great product. And there's actually similarities here with two previous episodes. It's the Lululemon episode and the Trader Joe's episode. And it's the idea that if you're building a cult product that expands into a broader audience, first of all, just make a great product, right? Make a great product, and you cannot microwave a cult. Like, it took decades, literally decades, for Sriracha to gain the mind share and create the cult-like experience that we know today. And just like Lululemon started with yogi enthusiast, just like Trader Joe started with the overeducated, underpaid, but smart people in LA that just wanted different international cuisine. And they didn't want to be talked down to. They want to be introduced new flavors and learn about them, right? That was Trader Joe's. And it took decades, but they stayed true to their model. They stayed true to their initial, hey, we're only going to give our shoppers interesting and I guess relative to the rest of the grocery industry, the best ingredients that we can find and the best products and best deals we can find. Lululemon, the best materials, the best textile manufacturing. Manufacturing, ingredients, that's the Sriracha story, right? It's very similar. And you can't microwave it. You find that first group that is so devoted to your product that it's pure word of mouth happens from there. Not to say that obviously Lululemon does advertising. Trader Joe's, very nominal, their marketing spend. They spend it all on that newsletter, the Fearless Flyer, as they did for decades, to educate consumers. But I think you'll see a lot of parallels between the cult building and just having a great product. Okay, so the Sriracha story, specifically this bottle story with hot sauce, we can start in 1930s. There's a Thai town that's spelled Sriracha. So it's SRI space RACA, right? There's a housewife named Thanam Chakapak. She created a paste of chili peppers, distilled vinegar, garlic, sugar, and salt. So that combination, that paste, remember I said about Thailand, they like to dip. India, when they got their hold on them of fresh chilies, they made them sauces to cook the meat in. Very different. I mean, you can dip. I love me dipping some bread in garlic naan. I mean, some a garlic naan in butter chicken. Don't get me wrong. The dip game is very strong in India. But I'm talking literally just like a small cup to dip your meat in, not to like drench it, right? That's what Thai's version of sauce was. So obviously this type of sauce made its way to Vietnam. Now, David Tran was born in 1945, Vietnam still under French colonial rule. Okay? He was born in a place called Soc Trang. This is outside of Ho Chi Minh City, what is now known as Ho Chi Minh City, at the time Saigon. It's the commercial capital of South Vietnam. Now, at the age of 16, he moved to Saigon. He's one of 9 siblings. David Tran moved to Saigon. His older brother was there. Most of the rest of his family was still in the village where he was born. His first job, this all comes back, right? Like these things don't happen overnight. Like he didn't just decide to make hot sauce. It's a combination of his life experience. Just like how Lululemon founder Chip Wilson spent 20 years in manufacturing of clothes and clothing retail before he started Lululemon. Just like how Joe Kalum spent 15, 20 years in pharmaceutical and convenience store retailing before he started Trader Joe's. In his teens, David Tran was selling chemicals. Remember that. His knowledge of chemicals will come in very handy when he has to preserve chili peppers for his first chili business. Now, he was during the Vietnam War, so really kicks off in the mid-60s. So David Tran, same age as my dad, basically. They had different kind of paths, obviously. My dad was a young doctor during the Vietnam War, operated on thousands of American GIs and South Vietnamese that had been injured as the war really ramped up. Now, David Tran was, because there's conscription, he joined the South Vietnamese army. But, and let me add that David Tran was not traditionally fluent in Vietnamese because he came from a Chinese-Vietnamese family. Cantonese was his first language. So he didn't actually even go to battle during his time as a conscripted Vietnamese soldier. What was happening was the U.S. government was paying the South Vietnamese army a salary. I'm putting salary in air quotes here because there's a lot of corruption for every person in a unit. So David Tran was one of these people that was conscripted, put into a unit, and the U.S. government was paying the leader of that unit to have soldiers at the ready. But basically that money was being stolen. So the exchange was that David Tran wasn't sent into battle. So what did David Tran do? He was like a chef. Whenever he needed a small task done, he would do it. And he spent 5 years doing that from age 20 to 25. So in 1970, when he'd finished his conscription, he started selling hot sauce. So what was happening in Saigon at the time? So Saigon, again, the commercial capital of South Vietnam, is quite protected from the war as much as possible. There's still some violence there from the Viet Cong. The North Vietnamese had communist cells in the South. But as much as possible, there was to be protected. And the other thing I need to mention about Chinese-Vietnamese, Chinese in general that live anywhere in Southeast Asia, around the region, so now modern day Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, they were the merchants, extremely wealthy versus the rest of the population. They were the traders, they were the business people because of the Chinese trade that had been going on for centuries at this point. China obviously was seen as the Middle Kingdom. They conducted trade with all these other, in their eyes, satellite states for thousands of years. So throughout Southeast Asia and Vietnam, the Chinese were known as the merchants, were known as the business people. So David Tran got into business. So very interesting how he got into business. So this is as described in the oral history that David Tran actually did with a professor at UC Davis. So to quote David Tran, he says, "I thought of making it because the pricing of fresh chili jumps up and down a lot. But if I can make the chilies, keep it fresh and keep the pricing low, when the price of chili goes up, he gets the same sale price at the market." So like there's a huge arbitrage. This is how David Tran got into the chili game. It was arbitrage. So chilies go bad. David Tran has knowledge in chemicals. So he was buying chilies in the local markets when the prices were low and then preserving them. And then he would resell them when prices were high and the local communities were willing to pay the high prices. Pure arbitrage. So he was doing this for 8 years. But remember, 1975 was the fall of Saigon. My parents had left Vietnam in 73, 74. They were not communist sympathizers, so they had to find a way outside the country. David Tran stayed in the country and for 3 years under communist rule was still able to operate his pepper selling business. But in 1978, tensions between Vietnam and China, neighboring countries, lifelong enemies, thousands of years have fought. The last land war China had was in Vietnam. They invaded northern Vietnam in 1979. So in the lead up to that, in December 1978 is when David Tran left. It's because the Vietnamese wanted local Chinese out, or even Chinese-Vietnamese out of the country. And David Tran was like third or fourth generation Vietnamese born in Vietnam, but the communist government wanted them out, and they had to pay for their way out. They left with nothing. David Tran, his siblings, his wife left Vietnam with nothing. They had to pay their way out. And when I say nothing, that's not necessarily true. They can bring whatever they could on their persons. So listen to this hustle that David Tran pulls off. The communists would let you live with whatever limited supplies you could put on your person and like the equivalent of a knapsack, right? David Tran saved up all that money from selling hot sauce. He saved $20,000 worth of gold bars, which is worth about $100,000 today. He put it in condensed milk cans. If you've never been in Southeast Asia or Vietnam, condensed milk is just like, it's like thick, creamy milk that is just pure sugar. Okay. So if you've ever had the Vietnamese drip coffee, it's basically a crack. It's because it's like this condensed milk crack sugar with like condensed with the slow drip caffeine, crack caffeine, right? It's like you drink that, you're wired for days. I should have probably done that before this podcast episode, but I didn't. I'm pretty wired anyways. I had 2 Red Bulls. But TLDR is this. He put the gold bars in those cans. We're talking about immigrant hustle. We're talking about just getting the job done, right? He gets on the ship. They search him because the communists don't care. You have to pay to leave. And if you leave and they see something on your persons that they want, they're just going to snatch it, right? So at this time, married with 1 child, David Tran is able to get out of the country. He flees with about 3,000 other refugees at this point. So he gets himself onto a Taiwanese boat called the Hui Fong. So the company that we now know today that's called Hui Fong was from the name of this boat that he left Vietnam on. And that boat's called Gathering Prosperity. Side note, David Tran's never been back. So he left Vietnam in 1978. He's never been back. It's been 45 years. So he gets on that boat with his family. He ends up in Boston, right? So you can imagine Vietnam's quite a tropical place. He didn't mind initially to be in Boston because he wanted to see what winter snow was like. There wasn't even any snow. David Tran didn't even get any snow in his first couple of months in Boston. He was there over the winter. So it was too damn cold. So he moved because his brother had been able to get to California. This is the urban legend. Calls up his brother. He's like, yo, have you seen any chilies or peppers in California? His brother's like, yeah, lots of chilies and peppers here. Lots from Mexico. So he's like, all right, packing up. I'm coming. He spent like 2-3 months in Boston, flew down to Los Angeles. Lincoln Heights is the community he moved to. I think in Lincoln Heights, he lived with like his wife, son, brother-in-law, father-in-law. Like the entire family is in Lincoln Heights, right? We're talking about pure hustle here. So he gets there, wastes no time. Within 3 months of landing in LA, he's got them gold bars, right? Incredible. He was able to smuggle out $100,000 worth of gold bars, put it immediately to use. He's like, I'm a refugee in California. What am I gonna do? I make hot sauce. Remember, at this point, he is 33 years old, spent his life, a decade essentially, as a chef, chemical background, making hot sauce. You don't have very many options when you're a refugee. A Vietnamese refugee in America in the 1980s. So what do? He does what he knows. Gets in the hot sauce game. Spends, I think at this point, maybe half of whatever gold bars he has left that he hasn't spent on rent. He buys he buys a car, gets a lawyer to get Hui Fong registered as a corporation. And actually, they don't even make the investment into warehouses. They're creating these peppers at home. And the way they're doing it, the amount of hustle that's going on here is crazy. So this is from the oral history. I want to read what David Tran said about getting chilies in those early days at markets in California, in LA. We asked the market if they had chili. They said no. Some days they have it, some days they don't. But if they have a small volume, we told the guy, we go to the Central Market, we find it, we'll buy whatever chilies they have. Green, red, half done. And they're making this chili sauce that David Tran knew about. And there's no rocket science, right? He's making this great product that he's made for over a decade in Vietnam before he was forced to leave the country. And then he's selling it to the other Vietnamese refugees or the Southeast Asians that are living in LA. Obviously, tons of immigrants in LA. That's his business. And he uses some of those gold bars to buy a big blue van. He makes the bottle himself. This bottle, he designs it, right? Rooster, he was born in the year of the rooster. The green cap means prosperity. It's translucent, so you can see the sauce, which has its bright red color because those are the type of, he used jalapenos to create the sauce in California, right? And then there's the other thing we'll do is like, I mean, you look at this, it's such a well-known logo, but if you were to go to any logo designer, they would, and never in a million years tell you to do this, right? But it's so distinctive. There's actually 5 different languages on here. There's Cantonese, Vietnamese, English, I think there's Spanish, Taiwanese. It's because the idea is that it's international. So this is all David Tran, right? He's not dicking around. He's getting there. He's getting right down to business, people. You want mayonnaise? Go buy some mayonnaise. You want less spicy sriracha? Go get some mayonnaise, man. Right? He's making sriracha. So now we're going to go to 1988. That's when he teams up with a local California farm. Before then, he's hitting the markets. So we're talking now at this point, he's done 5 to 8 years of just hustling, pure hustling, right? Of doing, making peppers at home. He actually did get a 5,000 square foot building in Chinatown with some of that money in 1980. In 1987, he'd upgraded to a 68,000 square foot warehouse in Roseman, California. It was initially just his family making it, but then they started hiring some Mexican laborers and some locals. 1988, he teamed up with Craig Underwood at Underwood Ranches. Fresh jalapenos, they had a near 30-year exclusive relationship. That relationship blew up in 2017. We will talk about that later in this episode. But just know now that in the late 80s, he's got the single farm and he's got a 68,000 square foot factory. Locals are buying it, right? Locals in LA and immigrants are buying this product. It's spreading. It's clearly enough for them to survive and thrive. So never had a sales team, right? He's had the same 10 distributors doing the same wholesale prices for nearly 4 decades at this point. Remember what he said. He wants to make a rich man's sauce at a poor man's price. That's how he framed it. They don't do ads. It's all word of mouth, okay? In 2010, they moved into a 650,000 square foot warehouse. So just give me an idea, they spent $40 million on that warehouse. It's in Irwindale, California. So clearly making cheddar, right, through the 90s. Now, the beauty about this sauce is quite simple. But his formulation, David Tran's formulation, there's just something about it, right? There are knockoff sauces. I've tried them all. They're just not the same. It might be a placebo. I don't care. 100% convinced that this sauce has the secret sauce. Now, as we get to 2010, the sales are hitting around 50, 60 million a year now. So this factory, Irwindale, it pumps out 18,000 bottles of sriracha an hour. Now, the key thing with that Underwood Farms relationship was that you harvest the jalapenos in the spring. Small window. There's a small window to harvest jalapenos. And essentially, they're harvesting and running these factories all 16 hours a day. And they'll go through 100 million pounds of chilies in a very small window, a couple months. And which is why losing that relationship with Underwood's Farms is such a big hit. Again, we're going to talk about that a bit later. So you move through the 2010s, the cult aspect really picks up with sriracha. And nowadays, it's just everywhere, right? I think I'd say that mid 2010s is when Sriracha really blew up. But that's just a pure hustle story, right? Like this guy arrives, gets gold bars. Imagine what would have happened if there were no gold bars. That's game over. That's the end of it, right? David Tran's got the gold bars. And he's able to use those gold bars to create an amazing product. And that amazing product is now doing 150 million a year. And it's made him the only true hot sauce billionaire in America. Now we're going to tease out a lot more details about the Sriracha story in the awards section. So let's pause for a quick hot minute and jump into the awards section because there's going to be a lot to learn for this episode. For our listeners, if you are new to this podcast series, just know that the awards section is borrowed from the Rewatchables podcast, Bill Simmons from The Ringer, to talk about movies with various Ringer hosts and guests. So they have a bunch of awards for each movie they do. I'm doing the same thing here. I borrowed some of those. I've added some of my own. So the first award we're going to give out for the Sriracha episode is Apex Mountain. So what part of this hot sauce Sriracha story, the chili pepper story, is at its peak? Okay? Obviously, for me, it's the hot sauce. This is my favorite hot sauce. That's the peak for me. But that's not good enough. We're going to have to expand here. So I'm going to say that the Apex Mountain, what is the top of anything from this story, is a random system of measurement. Because that's what the Scoville heat unit is. So remember how I told you about the Scoville heat unit system? 0 is the red bell pepper. 2,500 is Tabasco. Sriracha is about 5,000 shoes. Jalapeno pepper is about 30,000 shoes. Pepper spray, 2 million shoes. Pepper X, 2.6 million, hottest pepper in the world. So this whole thing was created by a pharmacist named Wilbur Scoville. So let me read this excerpt from the Devil's Dinner. It was while working at the Park Davis Pharmaceutical Company of Detroit in 1912 that Wilbur Scoville formulated what became known as a Scoville organoleptic test, a method for determining relative levels of spicy potency in different types of chilies. So remember that if a 5,000 Sriracha has 5,000 shoes, what that really means is how many times do I have to dilute this with sugar water, like droplets, 5,000 times for you not to taste anything. However, there's a big problem with this measurement system. How do you measure this? So let's say I'm tasting Sriracha hot sauce and I had to try it 5,000 times for me to tell you, oh, you know, on that 4,999th time, I tasted a little bit something. Why don't you give me a 5,000th time and I'll tell you what it tastes like. The problem is that system for any person, that taste testing system, it's completely subjective. Everyone's different. My old man, total chili pepper savage. This dude with a dinner he'll just take them cayenne peppers and just chew on them, nibbling on them, right? It's just like a thing. It's, I guess, Southeast Asia, Vietnamese thing, especially the older guard. They just take whole peppers, nibbling on them. Like it's nothing. Nibbling on it's like a toothpick, right? He'll do that while he's eating like a rice and fish. So A, subjective. B, you get diminished taste. I mean, the heat is diminishing every time you put it on, right? Like you put the heat on the first time, you're building up some level of defense against it, or you're getting used to it, right? It's like when you stand out in the cold, right? Obviously, you stand out in the cold for 5 minutes, it's not going to feel as cold in the first second. That's the same idea here with the heat. So it's quite subjective. And there's a diminishing return aspect of course, it's not stable. It's not like a controlled experiment because people are reacting to the heat every single time. So listen, even now, people use liquid and gas chromatography. That's when you can break out the actual like components of a mixture using proper chemistry. Like in Korea, the measurement system is called a gochujang hot taste unit. So they actually go straight chemicals. It's like how much capsicum is in this bad boy, right? They're just going to look and find out. But because of how much mind share the shoe has, which is why I call it random measuring unit, how much mind share it has, like when you do these the hottest pepper in the world tests, like or you go in the hot ones, that the amazing YouTube show with Sean Evans, where they're trying hotter and hotter spices or hot sauces. People want shu. That's not what they want. So you can convert like all these units back to shu. So Apex Mountain for me, random measuring unit. The other Apex Mountain is Texas cuisine, because in 1977, chili was declared the national dish of Texas. And like we've talked here about how Christopher Columbus completely butchered chili peppers as like the terminology. Well, chili, so also the food chili eaten by cowboys, where you just put, chili beans, because remember, chili peppers have that preservative aspect, right? You pack it tightly and you travel with that and then just reheat it and eat it, right? Cowboy food, Texas, since 1800s. Texas cuisine, the state of Texas gave it a thumbs up, called it the state's national dish. Okay. So those were the two Apex Mountains. What has aged badly? All right. So here's a Sriracha story. This is unfortunate. So Underwood Farms, which I told you was the primary provider of jalapenos to Sriracha in 1988 to 2017. That was the relationship, almost 30 years. So the problem was that this relationship, which grew from 50 acres in that first year, 50 acres, mind you, right? It went all the way to 1,700 acres just for Huy Fong, just for David Tran's company. That relationship broke up because there's lawsuits that were shot both ways. In the end, Huy Fong had to pay Underwood Farms, I think, $25 million. This all happened in the last couple of years. But the agreement was partially written and partially oral. So under the agreement, Underwood would estimate the cost of equipment and chili production ahead of each harvest season, and Huy Fong would pay in installments. So there's this reliance on Underwood to estimate and grow up, because they're the grower of the chili, the jalapeno experts, right? After each season, Underwood would tell you the cost, and Huy Fong would pay in full. So this is from a Guardian article about the lawsuit. So basically, these two parties got into disagreement one year about this payment because it wasn't written in stone, partially oral, and then there's an estimating component. Huy Fong says Underwood was overestimating, and then Underwood was saying that Huy Fong was screwing them, and that since that they were their anchor client, and that Underwood was, in their eyes, bending over backwards to build this business just for Huy Fong to have jalapeno peppers, that if Huy Fong doesn't come through, doesn't make payments, Underwood's in deep trouble. So the TLDR is that Underwood had to lay off 44 employees. They ended up getting paid out on this claim. So this doesn't age badly, right? Like Underwood said that, I'm not going to necessarily agree with this, because Underwood's saying that their jalapenos completely made the product. Sure, got to have good ingredients. But remember, there's a lot of other Sriracha knockoffs and competitors, because David Tran couldn't patent Sriracha the sauce. You could trademark this bottle, the bottle type, but Sriracha is from a region, and in the past, like Tabasco was able to get patented, even though it was like a type of a chili. That the legal system kind of frowned on letting David Tran take over the entire Sriracha brand, the idea of Sriracha. But there's been knockoffs, and they're not as good, right? They're just not. This sauce is hella good, people. Eggs, pizza, pasta, anything on your tongue, doesn't matter. Drip it all day long. It's delicious. Underwood started making its own Sriracha. So that's the state of the relationship. So that is the award for what aged the worst. It was a relationship, unfortunately. What's the funniest thing from this story? All right, well, the funniest thing from the story is I was pepper sprayed once as a teenager, a dumb youth. My buddy was getting in a fight. Huge fight broke out. I ran to help him out. And let's be honest, what was I going to actually do? Like, come on, Trung. Like, don't be a hero here. But went to support my friend, got pepper sprayed in the face by a police officer, was trying to clear people out. It hurt like an MF. I actually went to the ER. Well, I didn't have to go to the ER because it just goes away. Like, as we talked about capsicum, it just wears off eventually. I probably should have just smothered my face with yogurt or milk. But it burnt. went to the hospital. They had a good laugh. So that was pretty funny. Notable predictions. We're going to have to go back. David Tran. Very simple, notable prediction. I'm not changing the heat of my sauce. And I mean, since David Tran created Sriracha in the mid 80s, I mean, hot sauce has gone hotter, right? So he was right. He's like, if you don't like hot sauce, use less. This is not mayonnaise. I like the notable prediction. Here's the first time I've done this on this show. What's a bad prediction? It's not necessarily a bad prediction. Was how Columbus completely guffed the chili and the peppers, right? So here's from the Devil's Dinner what was said. The insistence that anything spicy must be a form of pepper has stayed in European nomenclature ever since Columbus. Even though the chili has no biological connection with either black pepper or malagueta. The latter, the sharp-tasting seed of a bright red fruit more commonly known as grains of paradise, right? So there is no relation to chilies and peppers. So it's not really a prediction. That's just like a guff, a forward-looking guff. Okay. So again, I want to shout out Gastropod. They put me onto 2 books, The Devil's Dinner and 8 Flavors by Sarah Lohman. So Sarah Lohman also talks about David Tran and Sriracha. But the reason I'm bringing Sarah Lohman up in this episode is like, what is the biggest what if from the Sriracha story? All right. The biggest what if for sure is if David Tran wasn't able to get that condensed milk can, or the cans he had a condensed milk with the gold bars in them, one of the small gold talents. I don't know what it's called. Whatever. Gold in condensed milk cans. If he didn't get it out, he's not paying for that Chinatown building. He's not paying for rent when he gets to LA, right? None of this happens without that. That's the biggest what if. The second what if has to do with something called trends mapping. So this is relevant for people listening to how ideas grow, right? So what Sarah Lohman wrote about was how trends make it into a cult product, which was Sriracha is, into larger, I guess, broad community, or just the retail market in general, right? There's 5 stages of food trends. And here's how it happens in the food game, and we'll talk about Sriracha on each step. Stage 1, the flavor, the ingredient, appears in foodie dining establishments. So in the mid 90s, San Francisco, like 5-star restaurants in San Francisco and in Manhattan, they started using Sriracha. So different flavors of Sriracha comes. Remember the ingredients in here, right? Sugar, chili, garlic, vinegar, all those flavors. They can be applied to very many different things. And as we talked about, where's Michelin from? The Michelin star system is from France. France did not dabble with the hot chili game because of the whole humoral system back, historical dependence on the humoral system, as we talked about in Europe. They did not dabble in hot sauce or chilies. It's unfortunate because France obviously has baller food, right? So stage 1 starts in foodie establishments. Stage 2, gourmet magazines or foodie-focused blogs start writing and talking about the ingredient. So a big thing for Sriracha was 2010. It got into Bon Appetit, obviously one of the most influential food media services, right? So Bon Appetit wrote, I think they called it ingredient of the year. Secret ingredient in dishes served at both 4-star restaurants and neighborhood mom and pop shops, referring to Sriracha. Stage 3 is that the new food appears in chain restaurants. P.F. Chang's had Sriracha in the early 2000s. Good on you, P.F. And then late 2000s, you had Cheesecake Factory and Applebee's started dabbling in the Sriracha game, right? That's stage 3. Stage 4 is you have women's lifestyle networks start talking about Sriracha. So the big ones to call out here are Food Network and Martha Stewart Living, okay? And then stage 5 is when it hits all the fast food chains that we all know. So there's been Sriracha at Subway for like a decade now. I'm a Southwest steak and cheese guy. I got the Southwest sauce, but also that line of Sriracha mayo. Okay? Funny enough, Sriracha mayo. David Tran, maybe your prediction was wrong. People didn't just eat mayo, they combined it with Sriracha. How offended are you? I actually don't know how offended David Tran is about Sriracha mayo, but based on that LA Times quote, I'm guessing he's a little bit offended. Lay's Chips came out with Sriracha flavored Lay's. Again, none of this is licensing. All the clothing you see that have Sriracha on it, any swag Sriracha, has nothing to do with Hui Fong, Okay, this is just word of mouth, people getting excited. There's a whole documentary done in 2013, Sriracha documentary. Fantastic. I also encourage people to watch that. Okay, so that's the 5 stages. So what if is, here's a what if. What if it doesn't get past any of those stages? We talked last week, our last episode about La Sagrada Familia. So many what ifs in the La Sagrada Familia story. This is similar. What if it stopped at one of these stages? What if P.F. Chang didn't have the foresight to be like, you know what? We're already doing retail Chinese food for North American audiences. What if they didn't say, hey, let's throw sriracha, which is obviously such a natural match? What if they didn't say that, right? Sriracha, at this point, I can't even mention it. The immigrants that were eating sriracha in the 80s were eating it at the pho shops, beef noodle soup shops, the Vietnamese beef noodle soup shops, beef noodle soup shops. Let me try it again. Vietnamese beef noodle soup shops. Okay, try that tongue twister. So 80s, 90s, that's when this really blew up in North America, was at the Vietnamese pho restaurants. And obviously, if you go to Vietnam, these are on every single table. And now, mostly, almost any Asian restaurant has a sriracha as the sauce on the table, as they should. So the big what if is any part of these 5 stages, right? What if Martha Stewart didn't shut it out? What if Bon Appetit didn't call it ingredient of the year? Could have fallen apart. We wouldn't have sriracha mayo at Subway, people. Something to think about. What's the biggest winner? The biggest winner from this chili hot sauce story, other than people that love sriracha, obviously, $150 million a year, we're all winning. But the biggest winner of this episode is the country of Bhutan. The country of Bhutan got chilies from India in the 18th century. And according to the book, The Devil's Dinner, it was adopted more wholeheartedly in Bhutan than anywhere else on earth. The standard purchase of 2.2 pounds of whole peppers, right, is the minimum weekly requirement for a small family. They're eating 2.2 pounds of peppers a week per family in Bhutan. So apparently in Bhutan, like from a young age, you are just getting indoctrinated in the chili game. I read an excerpt also from the Devil's Dinner book. It's like, if there was no chili, they couldn't even eat the food. It was just flavorless. They needed chili. It's just like Bhutan has been completely taken over by chilies. Apparently, again, I'm not a doctor, but I am a doctor's son and brother. So take that what you will. Apparently, the chili consumption in Bhutan may be leading to ulcers, peptic ulcers. I don't know the science behind that. Throwing it out there, it was mentioned in the book. All right. Biggest loser from this story. I'm saying Northern Europe. People, how can Northern Europe not have chili? Well, we discuss why. But again, Americas have a chili tradition. Iberian Peninsula have a chili tradition. Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia, China. China is probably one of the biggest winners. Again, they'll get their own episode. Hunan province, Sichuan food. Like, you know what? I'm just going to throw it out there. This is what Mao Zedong said about chilies. You cannot be a revolutionary if you don't eat chilies. I'm not cool with Mao. Okay, let's throw it out there. But there's a quote for you. We're talking about the biggest winners. Clearly, China, the history, their relationship with chilies. There you go. Okay, so the biggest loser is Northern Europe. I'll tell you something interesting about their non-involvement with chili is so classic Indian food, as we talked about, the way that they make a thick base, right? That's the purpose, to cook the proteins in, or I guess paneer, which is like the cheese, or I guess tofu, a lot of tofu product, Indian food, obviously. It's very different in France, right? France will cook the protein first, and then they'll make a reduction from all the delicious juices from their French cooking. So their approach to like sauce making was also quite different than how the Indians want to get the flavors from the chilies into the proteins, whereas the protein is the base in French cooking. So something to think about. But I mean, like even in Italy, right? You can have these delicious linguine seafood pastas with like chili peppers. France, like, come on. You have the most Michelin restaurants in the world and you don't use chilies. It's kind of crazy if you think about it. So the biggest loser is European cooking for not stepping up its chili game. The other loser, the people of Irwindale, California in the year 2014. So remember how I said they're doing 18,000 bottles a day of sriracha? the city of Irwindale sued Hui Fong and David Tran in 2014 because the peppers were so odorous. The capsicum, the capsicum smoke was like causing people to choke out in the city, and causing sickness, allegedly, from this lawsuit. So the lawsuit was that Hui Fong was a public nuisance. But you know what? People loved Sriracha so much. There's like huge like protesting not to shut down the factory. I guess they dropped the lawsuit and Hui Fong figured out a way to produce this in such a way that no one could complain. David Tran smartly, never being in the marketing advertising guys we talked about, they started doing public tours of Sriracha, the Sriracha Irwindale plant, just to let people know, listen, we all good, right? Like, look at these peppers we're getting now from California, New Mexico, Mexico, because they no longer had the Underwood relationship. They started getting it from the 3 areas that I mentioned, new farms. It's like they're all coming in the factory. We're making 18,000 bottles a day at its peak, or is it an hour? Either way, it's a lot. Whole point is this. They now do the tours and the factory is accepted in Irwindale in that community. Okay. Are there any substitutes? All right. I mean, not really. I know there's like a lot of hot sauce connoisseurs. One of the funniest things I read while researching this was that like chilies was the male version of planting flowers. Like dudes love it, right? Dudes love making hot peppers. That's like a dude thing. And so lots of like craft hot sauces. I've tried some other random hot sauces. It's fun, right? You see how much heat you can get into it. I don't know, like Tabasco, owned by the McKelney family. What's funny is that McKelney, I don't have his first name here, but the guy that created Tabasco was a Confederate soldier. And when he died, he had a banking background. Didn't even mention the Tabasco hot sauce. It was like a total side hustle for him. But now it's obviously part of publicly traded McCormick & Co. Frank's Red Hot Sauce was created in the 1920s. It's got a very low SHU, a Scoville heat unit of 450. What I will say about Frank's Red Hot Sauce is it's actually not that hot, but it also created the buffalo wing. So Frank's Red Hot combined with butter drenched on the buffalo wing was created in the city of Buffalo at Anchor Bar and Grill in 1964. I actually would say that Frank's is my second favorite hot sauce. It's not hot at all. It's not even just the non-SHU we're talking about. You taste it. It's like it's nothing, but it's delicious when drenched in butter. Shocker. Okay. So those are the awards. Now we will get into, here we go. What are we going to get into? Okay, here we go, people. Yeah, I got the paper ready, people. We're going to get into what are the lessons. I got 3 lessons for you, okay? The first lesson from the Sriracha hot sauce story is the idea of Lindy, which we have not talked about. So the Lindy effect was popularized by a former trader, a writer, all-around intellectual, Nassim Taleb, okay? And he wrote about the Lindy effect. It's the idea that you can guess how long something will continue to survive based on how long it has already survived, right? So like Shakespeare, we read for 500 years. Very high likelihood we'll read it for another 500 years. Here's Taleb's exact quote from his book, Anti-Fragile. If a book has been in print for 40 years, I can expect it to be in print for another 40 years. But, and this is the main difference, if it survives another decade, then it will be expected to be in print another 50 years. This simply, as a rule, tells you why things that have been around for a long time are not aging like persons, but aging in reverse. Every year that passes without extinction doubles the additional life expectancy. This is an indicator of some robustness. The robustness of an item is proportional to its life. Okay, so what does that do, chili peppers? Do you know how Lindy eating chilies are? 7,000 years humans have been doing it, right? That's Lindy. We're going to be doing it for a long time. So let me bring it back to why it matters. Normally a business podcast is, Jeff Bezos used to say, when people asked him, is like, hey, how do you see the future? Like, well, what are your plans for the future? And Jeff Bezos is like, I don't look to the future and guess what people are going to do. I'm more concerned about what do I know that they've done for the last 100 years that will likely mean they're going to do for another 100 years, right? Like commerce. Are people going to buy stuff? Are people going to buy books? Are they going to want the lowest price? Are people going to want the best deals in 100 years? Yes, assuredly. So I think of all the episodes I've done so far, this is the first time I've mentioned Lindy. It's just because chilies are one of the lindiest things in the world, people. The endorphins we get, right? The preservative components of chili peppers and the capsicum. The health benefits we talked about. Asterisk, disclaimer, please do your own research. But very lindy, right? Extremely lindy is chilies. Second thing, lesson here is mining different cultures for products. So think about how crazy it was how circuitous the route it was for chilies and hot sauce to make it to the Americas, right? Starts in South America, goes to Iberian Peninsula, goes to Africa, goes to India, goes to Thailand, right? Obviously, Tabasco had the straighter route, but like that makes it all its way back to North America. So finding something that works in another country, I mean, this is not rocket science, like Greek yogurt, right? Chobani, you bring these flavors from different cultures because, there's a Lindy aspect to food. We talked about chili. Things that are Lindy, right? Is like things that are Lindy, but haven't really exploded in another culture. That could be useful. That could be very useful. I'll give you an example. Molson Hart, a Twitter friend of mine, runs Amazon businesses. He found, listening to podcasts, he said the way he found a lot of products was he would literally just look at Alibaba, look at like 10,000 products on Alibaba, find the best-selling ones that weren't being sold in North America and bring them to North America. Brain Flakes is one of his products. It's like a Lego type product. Kids' toys are Lindy. There'll always be kids' toys, right? Certainly they get in and out of fashion, but he found one, brought it over. So that's lesson number 2, mining other cultures for ideas. And I combine that with number 1, mine it for Lindy ideas, right? What was something that was done in another culture that is, that was native to that culture, but is also more native to the human experience? Chili peppers, extremely native to the human experience. Okay. The final lesson is just make an incredible product, right? So we opened it with the idea of Lululemon actually makes incredible textiles. They had breakthroughs. They had the flat seam manufacturing, which means you can have the seams on the outside so you don't chafe when you're exercising on the inside. That was an actual innovation. Trader Joe's completely flipped the grocery model on its head. They had these small retail locations, didn't have to carry everything, but targeted a certain audience, made sure that the SKUs had a high square footage per sales, and they just nailed those products that could sell through, right? But they made good ones that the customers liked. No advertising for David Tran. Done no advertising. And this is why. I love how he explained this. So he said this in the oral history. So the reason we're not advertising is because we saved all the money, because we had to pay for chili, make it, package it, and sell it. If in those early days we did advertising, we would have no product, right? There's so much, especially in the internet age, DTC businesses, and start so easy to spin them up. And you can pay for distribution on Facebook and on Google, right? Paying for ads. There's all this idea. Yes, it's important to sell. Yes, it's important to market. But don't put the cart in front of the horse, right? Because eventually you're going to need the word of mouth. Because without the word of mouth, advertising costs will balloon and just blow up your entire business. So make a great product. And what I will say about Hui Fong is I'll refer to another thing about the LA Times interview from 2013. So there was actually a period when David Tran did ask his lawyers to go sue people for using Hui Fong's intellectual property. But then, this is what the lawyers said. What David and Hui Fong realized is that they have a unique sauce. There's no replacement for Hui Fong, and that's the best protection they have. So that's a realization they made. And so I wrote about this thread, and Tim Ferriss put it in his Reddit, put it in his very popular 5 Bullet Friday newsletter. And this is the excerpt that Tim put on his newsletter about Sriracha. Tired of all the smoke and mirrors of overhyped entrepreneurship, all the hand-wavy buzzwords of the startup du jour, Sriracha is a wonderful story of product meets focus, focus, focus. Okay? So I will end this with 2 quotes from David Tran. He deserves the last word. He said, they asked if he's going to sell the company to private equity. They've been people knocking on his door for ages. He goes, this company, she's like a loved one to me, like family. Why would I share my loved one with someone else? He intends to keep it in the family business. His son and daughter work in the business, and they will continue his legacy. And then he goes, in a response to, will you sell your company? David Tran goes, who knows where the company will go? We just always try to make the best sauce possible. This guy, the product sells itself. He didn't advertise at the beginning because he literally couldn't afford it. And then that cult aspect took over, and he just trusts that the product speaks for itself. Obviously, there was some hiccups along the way. The Underwood Farm situation, obviously not great, but it's a great product. This is just a great product. I love it. I worked up a mad appetite doing this podcast, so I'm about to have lunch, and I will be eating this. I will be stuffing this down my face. And in the name of science, I might have to squeeze a little bit in my eye to get that capsicum, see what it feels like. But thank you for listening to this episode. Again, you can find the book, The Devil's Dinner, online. And it's a great book. 8 Flavors also is quite good. I'd recommend those 2 books. I want to thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this, if it made you hungry, if you like shoes, if you are Sean Evans from Hot Ones, please share this with other listeners. Group chats, WhatsApp messages. I'd love for people to get the word out. Please do rate it. I'm in the phase now where I am asking for ratings. You know what I gave this bad boy on Amazon? Hit it with that 5. And I just go, best thing ever. Kept it simple. But thank you, listeners. And until next episode.